So this is the first time back on YouTube since I was suspended for speaking at Speaker's Corner on subjects that are banned. Obviously it's difficult to know in advance what subject's banned, and so that's the really difficult thing. And so I have to now rigorously self-censor in order to be able to stay on YouTube, because basically they told me in their automated system they've decided that I'm obviously a thought criminal, and if I continue to be a thought criminal then I will be banned from YouTube. And you know, there are people who say, oh well, it doesn't matter, you can go on any other outlet, but of course it's not true, because the outlets do not have an audience, and I've spent how many years? 10 years building up some sort of audience and some sort of presence on YouTube. You assumed, of course, at the time that it would not become a Stalinist censorship system, which it has become. And so there are certain things you're not allowed to talk about. At the moment, the things you're not allowed to talk about is probably the most important things in the world, but I'll talk about them elsewhere, and I'll make links to those subjects underneath the video. So all the ideas I've been proposing have been based on scientific documentation, peer-reviewed documents, but it doesn't matter either, because there is a standpoint being promoted by the algorithms, by the machinery and by the governments, which you're not allowed to contradict. So that's the first proviso, I should say, before I finish speaking on this video and before I talk on this video. Now, therefore, I'm forced to talk about other subjects because of the ban. So what I'm going to talk about is the sociological and psychological aspects of the lockdown, and I'll talk about them because yesterday the body was found of a young man. Just check his name, the spelling of his name, because you might pronounce it incorrectly otherwise. So his name is Richard Okorogheye, and he was at Oxford Brookes University studying business and computing, and he left the Ladbroke Grove area where he lives, which is where I live as well, and he went to Epping Forest, and there he seems to have committed suicide. And is it any wonder that a young man who in the prime of his life has his future taken away from him by the lockdown, by a year of insanity, stuck at home, doing a university course that he pays £9,000 a year for, online, not able to meet other students, not able to socialise, not able to enjoy life. Instead, he finishes school and ends up sitting in front of a computer all day. And this is the most miserable of existences. Multiplying that is the fact that this young man, like many of African descent, suffered from an illness called sickle cell. And sickle cell, people with sickle cell were told by Public Health England that they must isolate and shield themselves. And he had to have blood transfusions, and so he would go out of his home to get blood transfusions. And you saw a picture of him walking, the last pictures of him were walking towards Epping Forest with a mask on. Now it's quite clear that he's been misinformed to make him think that he should wear a mask in the open air. And it reveals that he must have been in some sadness, misery, isolation. The fact that even in Epping Forest, shortly before we can only assume he committed suicide. Shortly before this, he is wearing a mask in the open air. Now, what sort of education is it you get when you sit on a computer listening to a lecturer talk, or in a seminar, an online seminar? It's no substitute for human interaction and for genuine university life. It's the destruction of university, it's the destruction of collectivity. And by the way, the evidence points, I read a couple of peer-reviewed medical articles about sickle cell, and there's a peculiarity of sickle cell that those studies that have been conducted so far seem to indicate that if you have got sickle cell, you are less likely to have a negative outcome, either ending up on an ICU unit or ending up seriously ill from COVID-19 than you are if you don't have sickle cell. There's a peculiarity of the disease that seems to be shown in the evidence. There was a study by King's College, another study in France. Now, obviously that's not final closed data, but it seems to be an indication of that. That might perhaps explain why in Africa and India, where sickle cell, certainly in sub-Saharan Africa, sickle cell is quite common, why there have been less deaths. It might even have some role in explaining that. In any case, the evidence is not there to justify Public Health England's decision to impose a shield. Obviously, it's a precautionary measure, as one doctor explained to me this afternoon. But given the circumstances, this young man is quite, 19 years of age. For him to be forced into these circumstances is, to be quite frank, barbaric. And it is not difficult to understand why he felt such despair that it appears that he took his own life. So that's the first thing I'd like to say. And the second thing I want to say is something about the video that we put out a couple of days ago, which shows Emma Birchley, and she's a journalist an independent journalist, but she works generally with Sky News. She's a sort of major anchor for Sky News in a lot of broadcasts over the years. And Jim, how you doing, Jim? He has got a very good eye for spotting state manipulation on demonstrations, infiltration and so on. And what he showed was that Emma Birchley and her team were on the demonstration on the 3rd of April, Kill the Bill demonstration and the anti-lockdown demonstration, but Kill the Bill in particular. And in Trafalgar Square, just around Trafalgar Square, Emma Birchill's film crew, there were 2 of them with her, at least 2, they launched an attack on the police. These are journalists for Sky News, physically attacking the police, shoving people into the police lines. And then a few minutes later, you'd think, okay, maybe it's a left-wing or troublemaking agitator who happens to work for Sky News and got carried away. No. What it turns out is that this guy working for Sky News is deliberately trying to incite a riot in Trafalgar Square in conjunction with Emma Birchley, obviously to produce some sort of footage that could be used by the state to justify repression. And there's no other conclusion you can draw from it. When you watch the video, there is no other conclusion you can draw. Now, to be fair, I sent the video to Cressida Dick, the Commissioner of Police in the Metropolitan Police, and her underling wrote back quite quickly and said, we will investigate this and put it onto the hands of our team investigating the events of that day. Now, at least, you know, they recognise the severity of the seriousness of the allegations involved, unlike the National Union of Journalists. Now, we've got a story about that, haven't we? The National Union of Journalists, they collaborated with the police to try and get me arrested on a number of occasions, and in order to try and steal my press card from me. So I sent this to the National Union of Journalists just to see how they respond to concrete evidence of criminal collaboration between Sky News journalists who are NUJ members, or at least Birchley is an NUJ member, and incitement to riot. You know, because they said that I must hand in my press card to the UK Press Card Authority because I was doing bad things on a demonstration for freedom and democracy on the 5th of November last year. And they said this was, well, they didn't even say it was bringing the union into disrepute. They just said that my behaviour was not in correspondence with anyone who should have a UK press card. And yet the Sky News journalists physically attacked the police, physically attacked other people who were either protesters or agent provocateurs themselves, being pushed into the police lines by one of the representatives or one of the members of Emma, what's her name? I get her name. Well, that's how insignificant a person she is. Emma Birchley. Emma Birchley's team were engaged in organised violence at this protest and incitement to violence. And then afterwards, you notice the same team members who would push people against the police are talking to the police and pointing people out who should be arrested. A rather peculiar type of behaviour for a journalist, would you not say? And yet when I handed that to the General Secretary of the Union and to the Assistant General Secretary, they wrote back to me and said my request that her press card be taken from her is not justified, and if I want to make a complaint I have to go through all the proper channels. And yet when I lodged a complaint against the General Secretary, all the proper channels were abandoned. And so these people, not only are they scurrilous agents of the state, destroying journalism and free press in Britain, they are also hypocrites, liars, and Stalinist manipulators. So that's my message to you, Assistant General Secretary of the NUJ. That's my message to you, General Secretary of the NUJ. That's my message to you, Emma Birchley and Sky News. And we will be coming after you to make sure that justice is served and that you do not get away with destroying the free press, with destroying democracy, with destroying the right to speak, and by setting up this direct collaboration in instigating violence and, if you like, faking riots in order to justify actions like the police and crime bill that is being introduced at the moment, and which the protests were against. So don't think we're stupid. We know what you're up to, and we're going to get you, and you will not get away with this stuff. A final point, just to remind you, I'm standing for the London Assembly with Piers Corbyn. We'll be doing actions on a regular basis. I will be making videos on a regular basis again, obviously with the proviso that I'm censoring in order to remain on YouTube. So don't forget, let London live. 6th of May, vote for Piers Corbyn, Khoo, and other Let London Live candidates. Speak to you again soon.